Good afternoon from the garden and welcome to today's video on forcing perennial vegetables. My name is Vera Greuting. I'm a permaculture gardener, designer and author, and in today's video I want to talk about why you would want to force perennial vegetables, how you can do it, and then I want to show you some examples of the vegetables, perennial vegetables that are suited to this treatment. Previously we have filmed a video about the different perennial vegetables that we grow, and in that video I talked about their advantages, chief among them being that because they start growing from well-established roots in spring, in contrast to annual vegetables that have to start from a tiny seed, they're ready for harvest very early in the year, often during the so-called hungry gap, when the overwintered vegetables are mostly gone and what you sowed this year is not ready for harvesting yet. However, you can advance the harvest even further and harvest earlier if you use a technique called forcing. To force the vegetables, as soon as you see them appearing in spring, you cover them with something. It can be different things, I'll talk about it later. And what that accomplishes is two things. You create a cozy, sheltered microclimate, which means that the plants will grow faster and you will be able to harvest earlier. But also because you're excluding light, the harvest will be different. And many perennial vegetables have quite a strong taste, but when you blanch them, the taste becomes milder and you get a sort of more sophisticated gourmet harvest. So what can you use to accomplish the forcing and blanching? Well, I have a couple of these beautiful terracotta pots that are made especially for forcing perennial vegetables such as rhubarb and kale. And they have great ornamental value. They're really pretty in the garden. They have this lid that you can use to peek in and see the progress, which is very handy. But they are also quite pricey and somewhat breakable and by no means necessary. I have used things like buckets. You can use a normal terracotta pot if it's sufficiently large. But you can also just simply earth up the vegetables. You can use some kind of mulch and cover them. That will all accomplish the same thing. There is one additional trick that you can use. If you have access to fresh manure, you could use it to sort of earth up around the container that you're using for forcing, such as the terracotta pots or a bucket. And this will create additional heat, which means that the vegetables will grow even faster and will be ready for harvesting even earlier. So now let's have a look at several perennial vegetables that you can force. And let's start with one that is pretty well known, and that's rhubarb. I love rhubarb. It's one of my favorite things in spring, and I have at least a dozen of plants around in the food forest part of the garden. I like to plant them under fruit trees because they grow very well in the part shade that the trees under the trees, and you can use the leaves, the large leaves, as mulch. But because I love rhubarb so much, I can never wait for the first harvest, and therefore I also always force a few plants. So let's have a look how this one looks. Hey, look at that. So this also gives you a good idea of the difference in growth. These plants were not covered. This one has been covered. So I've got much longer stems. They have this beautiful pale red, pinkish color, and the taste is milder. So when you're cooking with them, you need far less sugar than with the unforced, unblanched rhubarb. So now let's have a look at a couple of lesser known perennial vegetables that you can also force. So here's a plant that you probably do know, but probably did not know was edible, and it's hosta. Hosta is a popular ornamental for shady parts of the garden. This is quite a shady area in our food forest. And whereas in the West it's valued as ornamental plant, in Japan it's valued as vegetable. And what's harvested are the young shoots, the leaves when they're still rolled up, but they're even better when blanched. So here again you can see the difference in growth in between the unblanched and of unforced and forced plants. These look really great. I will harvest them today and I think we will use them in a stir fry probably, or just simply blanched with a bit of butter. Number 3 on our list is lovage, another plant that I like to plant close to my fruit trees, among other things because when it's flowering it's a great attractant of beneficial insects. It's a plant that is in appearance quite similar to celery and also somewhat in taste, but the taste is quite a bit stronger. I like to use it in similar ways to celery. I chop it up with carrots and onions and use it as a basis of soups and stews. But when it's blanched, the taste is a lot milder and you can use it as a vegetable in its own right. I can smell the celery-like flavor. And by now I'm sure you're pretty curious what's under my beautiful blanching terracotta pot. Number 4 on our list is a more obscure perennial vegetable and it's called Good King Henry. And you can think of it as a sort of a grandpa of spinach, but then in a perennial version and a bit more robust version. Here are plants, I hope you can see them, that have not been covered and blanched, and you can see the dramatic difference in both the size and also the color. These have these beautiful pink stems and a much milder taste, of course, as well. So these two I would just cook very simply, blanch maybe, because the taste will be quite remarkable. Now I want to show you 2 more perennial vegetables that you could be forcing, but I have not covered them, so I will just show you what they look like. So this purple beauty is called sea kale, and it is a plant that grows in the wild on the shores, both in the Netherlands and in England. And you can also force it and blanch it, and it will have a very nice mild taste in that way. The last perennial vegetables that I want to tell you about is asparagus, which is a pretty well-known one. This spring has been so far pretty cold, which is why our asparagus bed is just starting to get going. And I could have had a little earlier harvest if I had covered them up. In the Netherlands it's usually done by earthing up, but I don't do that generally. I just, when I want to blanch some of my asparagus, I just cover it with the terracotta pot. So that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give the video a thumbs up. And if you want to know more about perennial vegetables, check out my videos, 10 perennial vegetables and also harvesting in April, which I will link below. Happy gardening!